One way that we can control our users' experience within our models is to actually give them automated tasks that they don't have to do for themselves, right? We can automate these tasks by recording what we call macros. Macros is another name for a computer program in Excel that's based in the Visual Basic language that lays behind Excel in the background. It allows us to do all sorts of different things. In this video, I'm going to show you one example where we can actually use a program to go ahead and print out a certain tab that we're interested in. All right, so before we get going though, we're going to need a new tab enabled in your spreadsheet, and that's the Developer tab. Notice at the top here, I have Home, Data, and Developer. Developer is a tab you're going to need. If you don't have it, you're going to need to add it in. And the way you're going to do it is you're going to go into Options and Customize your ribbon. So Customize ribbon's about halfway down if you're on a PC. On a Mac, it's also in that, it's in a different menu, but Google should show you pretty quickly where that's at. Once you get to this menu, it'll look pretty similar on a Mac. You're just going to need to click this Developer option. When you click that, the tab becomes available, and you have access to a couple important things. The first is Visual Basic. We'll show you that in a second. But then also the Record Macro button. So the Record Macro button allows you to record the actions that you take in Excel. That way you can repeat them again in the future whenever you call on that program. So we're going to walk through an example and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to hit the Record Macro button. We're going to call it Macro 2. Well, actually, let's call it Macro Test. You can call it whatever you want. And as soon as I hit Enter, it's now recording any actions that I take. So if I come over here and type name, and then I come over here and type 1, 2, 3, and then do the previous cell +1, all of that generated lines of code in Visual Basic that we'll look at in a minute, but that we could essentially program to happen again in the future. All right, so I did that merely so we can look at those lines of code in a minute. Before we do that, let's actually do what we set out to do, and that's print out a page. So I'm going to go to the Print Financials tab that I've already built. Note that I've already formatted this tab nicely. I've actually already done the page setup, so it knows what to print, where to print it, where to put headers. And so all I have to do is hit Control P for my shortcut to print, give it a second to come up, and now it'll bring up my print menu. I do want to make sure that it prints to the right printer. Yep, let's do an Adobe PDF. You can see I have my header up here as well as a page number, and it's formatted nicely. So I'll go ahead and say print. Now it starts to print. It's actually going to pull up the save menu on another screen for me. So we save that. It says it's now printing. It prints out. Perfect. It printed for us. We're all set. We're still recording our macro, so let's actually type in here. I'm just going to type test right there. We're going to come back to the inputs. We're on our input tab, and now let's stop recording. All right, so that was our macro. We basically went to the Print Financials tab, we printed it, we came back, and we left a couple marks along the way. We put our name, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we also came over here and put test in. So let's go ahead and delete all that, come back to where we started, and now let's run that program again. We're going to run our macro to try to print that page again. The idea of these macros is, again, that you can automate routine tasks that you find yourself doing over and over again. So I'm going to go to macros now. We see our macro test right there, and I'm going to click run. So it's now printing. We can see it actually brought up on the other page. It's printing it. All right, so all those actions I had to take, it's doing it on its own. And look, you can also see the other actions that I took. Name, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we go to Print Financials, we see that test is typed there again. So all the things that I did last time got recorded and are going to get redone by the code whenever we run that macro. All right, so that's the basic idea of how we record the macro. Now, how do we look at that code? All right, later in the semester, we're going to get more into the code. But for right now, I just click Visual Basic, and it's going to pull up my spreadsheet. Sometimes it might pull it up like this. You have your Widgets RS model. You can click plus to go in there. And in modules is where our new code is going to be. Usually the most recent module, I'm going to click module 3. And there we see what's called a sub named macro test. So macro test was the name. That's where that comes from. Now you see a bunch of lines of code, right? I start out by selecting H5, range H5 select. That was the cell that I started in. Then it said, set the active cell formula equal to name. That's when I typed name. I then went over a cell and typed 1, 2, 3. I then did this funny looking thing where it says RC minus 1 plus 1. That means take the cell to the left and add 1 to it. Don't worry about the code in particular and the syntax or any of the details here. I just want you to get an idea that what you did in the spreadsheet is being translated into lines of code that are reproducible in the future. Finally, the important things for us are the print financials, are that we selected the print financials tab. That allows us to select that tab. This is the command that prints out our spreadsheet. And then finally, we go back to that inputs tab. All right, so if we wanted to, we could clean up this code by deleting that first set of items. We can delete that second set of items. And now we just have the nuts and bolts here is select the print financials tab, print it, go back to the inputs tab. So now if we run this code, we'll get that same answer again. So let's flip back. And this time we're going to do it with a button. All right, this is the last thing I want to show you here. So if you have these nice fancy buttons that run the macros automatically for it, it makes it a little bit better easier for the user rather than them having to go into the macro menu. So to add one, we go into Insert, and under Form Controls, the far left corner is this little button. So I can select this whole thing. The first thing it asks is for you to assign a macro. We're going to do macro test. Say OK, and now it's named button 60. We can change that pretty quickly. Let's change that to test button. And now if we want to run it, we can just push our test button. So we changed our code a little bit. It went to the financial statements tab. It prints. It's saving on my other screen. And then it goes back to the inputs tab that last time. All right, so that's how you record a macro and then how you use that macro in your spreadsheets.